They all say I'm a madman because my first pot of gold was earned by consistently losing 3 cents for every dollar I traded. You heard right. I use $1 just to get 90 minus 7 cents back. But you would never guess that all the city's gangs and underground money houses are lining up, begging me to sell these coins to them at an even higher price. Mr. Fox had some renown on the street. He was the type of person with connections. He was willing to help the poor, lending them money to get them through hard times. Of course, he wasn't a pure philanthropist. He also needed the poor to repay his kindness with something that might be more than the principal. But generally speaking, he was a good person, maybe perhaps something like that. In an underground office, Linch met Mr. Fox, a gentleman who looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s. He wore a deep gray suit dotted with red and blue, the most fashionable style this year, with a red and blue silk scarf tied at his collar, looking somewhat informal yet very elegant. Before Linch arrived, Mr. Fox had already heard about this kid's peculiarities from his men, like the words he had spoken earlier, which made him a little curious. "You're not afraid of me?" He had his men press Linch into a chair across the desk. "Few people on this street aren't afraid of me." Linch showed not a shred of fear. A scene like this was a small matter to him. He shrugged and asked in return, "Mr. Fox, would you harm me?" This question momentarily stunned Mr. Fox. He thought about it seriously, then shook his head. "I don't usually take the initiative to harm anyone, but if you do something unfriendly first." Harming someone for no reason is a very foolish thing for anyone to do. It would first tarnish one's image, and second, it would attract the attention of the Bureau of Investigation for such a motiveless act. Most people are looking for money, not trouble, and Mr. Fox was the same. That's right. So why should I be afraid? Lynch's composure and smile made Mr. Fox feel a flicker of doubt. He glanced at his assistant, then his gaze returned to Lynch's face. "But my men say, you've been watching me these past few days. Perhaps you can tell me why. Are you with the Bureau of Investigation?" They had already searched Linch before he came, and there was nothing to prove his identity. Paired with his attire, it didn't fit the style of those Bureau guys at all. So Fox didn't think he was a Bureau agent. This was also what made him curious. For some time, this kid had been staring at his business, that laundromat. He had also inquired about the kid's identity, out of curiosity and caution, which led to this scene. He was very keen to know what exactly Linch was up to. He picked up the notebook from Lynch's pocket and flipped through a few pages. It was all unintelligible. He asked his university-graduate assistant beside him, but this college-educated assistant didn't know what the characters represented either. Lynch's enthusiastic smile made Fox feel a little uncomfortable. The feeling was like, he didn't know how to describe it. It was like being cared for. "It's like this, Mr. Fox. I've noticed the laundromat's business and some of your little troubles. Plus, I believe you've already investigated me and know the problem I'm facing." Mr. Fox nodded, emphasizing one word: poverty. Linch pointed towards the ceiling, using a small gesture to attract Mr. Fox's attention and regain control of the conversation. "You're right. So I need to get out of this financial crisis as soon as possible. I want to do a little business with you." Instantly, everyone in the office burst out laughing. Mr. Fox, his assistant, and the two tough-looking brutes were all roaring with laughter. Linch looked at Mr. Fox without embarrassment, waiting until they had laughed for about 30 seconds and stopped before asking, "This isn't a joke." Mr. Fox started laughing again, "But I don't think there's any business we can do between us." His laughter naturally ceased as he spoke, then he frowned. "You want to borrow money?" Linch shook his head. "No, business, Mr. Fox." Mr. Fox had had his fill of laughter, and humanity's innate curiosity and desire for knowledge made him continue the conversation, at least until he knew the answer or lost interest. He wouldn't stop this interesting dialogue. "So, what business do you want to do with me?" Lynch's ever-present confident and sunny smile could easily make one feel favorable towards him. "I can provide more change, 5-cent, 10-cent, 20-5-cent, and 50-cent pieces, all coins, both new and old." Mr. Fox's expression changed abruptly. His slightly narrowed eyes revealed something unsettling. If one had to interpret this gaze, it would be killing intent. "You know what I'm doing?" He couldn't help but take out a cigarette and light it. "You've got a lot of nerve." Linch was completely unmoved. "I'm not even afraid of being poor. What else is there to fear?" The two stared at each other for a moment. It seemed this fellow named Linch was indeed a bold man, and at the same time his words began to genuinely interest Mr. Fox. Some industries have gray areas. For example, the finance company he was currently running wasn't entirely legal. Not only was the Bureau of Investigation watching him, but the Federal Revenue Service was too. He needed to pay taxes on the money in his hands through some channel legally and legitimately, without attracting too much attention, and the laundromat was an excellent channel. No one would care where every coin came from, nor could they figure it out. Throughout the entire Baylor Federation, basically all laundromats were controlled by people like him. But they also had a problem: it was too slow. The middle and upper classes have their own washing machines. They don't need to send their clothes to the street to be washed, only the poor would do so. But the poor often save up a week's worth of clothes before washing them all at once. For this reason, people like Mr. Fox had even come up with a new charging standard, charging by the pound, but it was still just a drop in the bucket. They couldn't force everyone to do their laundry every day. Doing so would only attract the attention of the Bureau of Investigation and the Federal Revenue Service, which was Mr. Fox's biggest headache. The feeling of having a safe full of money but being unable to spend it was simply awful. Now that this bastard in front of him claimed he could solve this problem, Mr. Fox's interest was piqued. "What's your plan?" Linch stated his method without any concealment. He couldn't hide it. Regardless of his current status and position, he couldn't stop Mr. Fox from finding out, so he might as well just say it to show his sincerity. "I will collect a large number of coins and sell them to you in exchange for a fee, and my income will be that margin." Mr. Fox glanced at his assistant again, who whispered in his ear for a while before he frowned and asked, "How much do you want?" Lynch's enthusiastic smile once again gave Mr. Fox that strange feeling of being cared for. 10%. "Are you crazy?" Mr. Fox couldn't help but shout. "I'd rather wait slowly." He couldn't accept a 10% price at all. When the transaction amount is $1, it's just 10 cents. But when the transaction amount is $100,000 or $1 million, it becomes a figure that makes one's heart ache. Linch didn't immediately haggle with him, but instead raised a new question. "Mr. Fox, do you have a copy of the Transaction Journal?" Here, the Transaction Journal was one of the largest circulation newspapers in the Baylor Federation, covering all 17 states and all regions of the Federation. Its content mainly focused on national and international financial and economic trends, as well as local financial and economic changes. In the series of confrontations, Mr. Fox gradually lost the initiative. He glanced at his assistant, who nodded, indicating they had it. Although their business wasn't exactly proper, their work was indeed closely related to finance. "Get me one of the oldest copies you have, and one of the newest. I will make you understand who the real winner is in our transaction." Lynch's firm and powerful voice and his confident expression made Mr. Fox begin to vaguely believe him. Much like when Lynch used to stand before a large crowd with a microphone giving a speech, people would look at him, then believe everything he said was true, and finally stuff money into his pocket and thank him. A few minutes later, Mr. Fox's assistant brought two newspapers, one from 4 months ago and the other from this week. Finance companies like Mr. Fox's were actually very concerned about the financial trends of the entire country and even the international community. They dealt with money every day and knew very well what these things represented. In addition to this, they were also very concerned about some changes in the social landscape, such as employment rates, unemployment rates, and social order issues. If the unemployment rate continued to rise, they would have to lower interest rates while reducing large loans to mitigate risks, which would also make their business more attractive. When the national economy showed clear signs of improvement, they would increase some interest rates while encouraging people to borrow more because people could afford to pay it back. Every day, Mr. Fox's assistant had to read a large number of newspapers to analyze the upcoming national situation, and then decide whether to terminate certain business in advance or pretend to have forgotten about them. This was definitely not a simple and straightforward business. Those people couldn't grow big, nor could they do it for a long time. Only people like Mr. Fox could operate such a business for the long term. This was also why he spent a lot of money to hire a university student to help him. He treated this as a career, not a way to make quick money. Linch opened the newspaper and browsed for a while, about 10 minutes or so. Mr. Fox didn't interrupt him, and even had someone bring him coffee and cigarettes. He had a faint sense of anticipation in his heart that this ordinary person named Linch would surely give him a surprise. This was not a baseless guess, it was something he had observed. An ordinary person like Linch couldn't possibly remain calm after being invited over, much less be able to meet his gaze after he revealed his killing intent. He was not an ordinary kid in Mr. Fox's age. Linch was indeed just a child. He was only 20 years old. After a dozen minutes, Linch drew some lines with the pen in his hand, then placed both newspapers in front of Mr. Fox at the same time. "I've underlined the content you need to read so you can see it more directly." Mr. Fox and his assistant both looked at it seriously. After reading back and forth several times, they had no clue. It was all real estate agency information. They didn't find anything at all. Mr. Fox was a bit puzzled. "I don't know what these mean. Do they have any special meaning?" Linch wasn't annoyed at all. He was very patient after all. When facing an excellent client and the money in his pocket, anyone in need of money could be patient. He walked over to Mr. Fox's side, His men wanted to stop him, but were stopped by Mr. Fox, which meant that Linch had gained Mr. Fox's trust short time. If he could fulfill what he said before, then this trust would last a long time. This newspaper provides leasing information for 2 street minus front apartments. The rent for this one is... Linch pointed to the place he had underlined and didn't continue. Mr. Fox subconsciously finished the sentence, 130 minus $5. Linch nodded in affirmation, right? 130 minus $5. Let's ignore the other things for now, and then look at how much the house next to it costs. Mr. Fox was very cooperative and moved his gaze to the underlined information on the other newspaper, continuing to say very cooperatively 170 minus $2. These 2 apartments are on opposite sides of the road, and the straight minus line distance is no more than 100 meters. From these price changes, Mr. Fox, what have you discovered? After pondering for a moment, Mr. Fox had already started to think seriously and said the monthly rent has increased by 30 minus $7. In Lynch's past, mature and successful cases, he always believed in one point, that is, letting these participants get more deeply involved in the case can save a lot of time and avoid some problems that people might not even have thought of themselves. They would convince themselves and firmly believe that their own conclusions were correct. This was particularly evident in math problems. Before it was clearly pointed out that the answer to some math problems was wrong, every test taker firmly believed that their own answer was right and others were wrong. Mr. Fox completed the process of deep participation through a simple mathematical formula. This feeling made him begin to be enveloped by a false illusion, a false sense of security created by himself. He wouldn't think Linch was a liar, because these were not told to him by Linch, they were conclusions he reached through his own clever mind and careful thinking. He trusted his own conclusions. The increase in rent means that buying these houses requires more money for months' time. Linch paused. No, it's actually increasing every day. A little bit, you may not notice it, but it is indeed changing. Do you admit that, Mr. Fox? Mr. Fox nodded. So what does this have to do with our previous business? Of course it does, Mr. Fox, these houses are right there. They won't change over time, for example, by adding a few more bricks or losing a few tiles. They are the same as they were when they were built, they haven't changed. They are constant, but the price has changed. What does that mean? Without waiting for Mr. Fox to think, Linch gave the answer, because this was an answer that Mr. Fox's mind couldn't come up with. What he did was to guide people towards the corner he needed them to discover at the right time, not to encourage them to think divergently. If the value of something hasn't changed much, but there has been a change in the process of paying for it, it can only mean that the value of the thing used for comparison has changed. In other words, over the past 4 months, the currency in our hands. Linch had, at some point, taken out a coin from his pocket, holding it between the joints of his thumb and forefinger. With a gentle flick, a slightly subtle but audible metallic vibration attracted people's attention. Mr. Fox, his assistant, and the bodyguards next to him, their eyes all fell on this flying coin. Linch said confidently has been depreciating, and has depreciated by about 20 minus 5% in 4 months, Mr. Fox. Mr. Fox's attention returned from the 5-cent coin lying motionless on the newspaper. He began to seriously consider Lynch's words and looked at his assistant. The assistant was a bit embarrassed. He wasn't a finance major, he just studied management. If it weren't for the higher salary here at Mr. Fox's, and if Mr. Fox wasn't his father, he wouldn't be here either. He felt that Lynch's words were not quite right, but he couldn't find any obvious flaws. During this process, Linch also used gold as a second example and instilled the concepts of depreciation and currency as also a commodity into the people in the room. He wasn't lying because these were all true and his examples were not problematic. It even involved the fact that 10 years ago people could buy a newspaper for 5 cents and now it cost 50 cents. The newspaper was still a newspaper, whether it was the ink or the paper. The production process and flow had not changed much. It wasn't that the newspaper had become more expensive, it was that the money had depreciated. Gradually understanding, Mr. Fox suddenly felt a little horrified. He changed his sitting posture and said with a stiff upper lip, "But our interest rates are very high, and some are even compound interest." He wanted to use this to give himself some sense of security, but this fragile sense of security was destroyed by Lynch's laughter a few seconds later. "I know, Mr. Fox. The problem is that our depreciating currency is not the money you can take out and put in front of people, but all your assets. All your assets are depreciating at a rate of 5% per month, and this is also a kind of compound interest if you can't get all your money to the Federal Revenue Service as soon as possible to complete the final procedures." Linch returned to the chair across the table and sat down. He shrugged and spread his hands. "Your proud wealth now might not even be worth a fart in a few years. Are you still concerned about that insignificant 10% now?" After leaving Mr. Fox's place, Linch wandered the streets for a while. Now that the deal was settled, he would soon have his first income, and the amount of this income was directly related to how much he invested. The more he invested, the higher the profit, a business that even top financial groups would be very envious of. He had been reading the newspapers recently, even though the whole world was engaged in development and construction, and the financial economy was improving, a promised annual return rate of some funds did not exceed 15%. The Transaction Journal in the first quarter of this year disclosed some detailed data from last year. The actual return rate of the most profitable fund was only 9.74%, not even 10%, and it had already become the most profitable fund of last year. So this business was very important. But at the same time, a new problem arose. He needed a sum of principal to exchange for those loose change in coins. Mr. Fox didn't mention this money, and with his investigation of Lynch's background, it was impossible for him not to know that Lynch didn't even have $100 on him or in his bank account, let alone the scale he promised to help Mr. Fox complete the transformation as soon as possible. He had to get another sum of money, not too much, a few hundred or $1,000 or $2,000 would be enough, because once this thing started rolling, the speed would only get faster and faster. He planned to talk to Catherine about a small sum of money when he got back in the evening, although he felt that doing so was indeed a bit. It was necessary for the future. Time passed bit by bit while he was wandering around. Today, Lynch returned home early at 6:30 in the evening. Catherine came back from outside, carrying a bag. Inside were the meat scraps and some minus fresh vegetables that the supermarket where she worked was going to discard today. These things were basically divided among the employees. After all, the purpose of everyone accepting oppression and exploitation here was to get these things for free. As soon as she returned to the apartment, Catherine was a little surprised. Lynch had always been coming back very late recently, and this was the first time in a while that he had come back so early. At first, she had fantasized that Lynch could honestly find a job, preferably in a factory. Although factory work was very hard and had a certain degree of danger, it had to be said that the benefits and social security for workers were the best. Those big business owners not only needed to take care of them in every aspect, but they could also join organizations like unions, while Catherine, who worked in a supermarket, couldn't join because she wasn't a worker. And there was no Cashiers Guild, such an unofficial organization. Nightmares always linger, but good dreams are easy to wake up from. For a whole week, Lynch, who had just seemed to have regained his spirits, was back to where he started. But now with a new trick, he was no longer staying at home, but using the excuse of looking for a job to go out and kill time. At the thought of this, Catherine became disheartened. She felt that her past choices were not just stupid, but that she was also blind. It was also because she had experienced these things that she realized how correct her mother's words were. Looks are useless, life needs a foundation, not good looks. She glanced up at Lynch, then changed her shoes and carried the bag into the kitchen and began to wash the meat scraps. These meat scraps were the shapeless kind scraped off the bone racks, mostly the size of a fingertip, and for some reason, they looked darker than the neatly arranged beef. So even if their prices were very low, they were hard to sell, and most people bought them not to eat themselves, but to feed their dogs. In fact, there was nothing wrong with these meat scraps. The silent atmosphere in the room was filled with something that made people uncomfortable, and that thing was constantly spreading and surging. Lynch sat on the sofa they had picked up from the garbage dump, watching his girlfriend silently processing the food. The distance between the two was clearly less than 10 meters, but it was as if a deep abyss had appeared in the middle. "Do you have any spare money?" Lynch asked. Catherine's movements paused slightly. She didn't turn back, didn't say anything, and after a brief pause continued to work on her hands. "A little, less than $500. This is what I've saved up this year." Saving money was not easy, especially for these young people with only a high school education. Rent, electricity, water, heating, some necessary expenses and losses, plus to people living with only one person working, it was already very difficult to save more than $400. Suddenly, a hint of heaviness was added to the strange atmosphere, pressing on the chests of the two people. Neither of them spoke again until Catherine had finished making dinner. The usual scraps plus a fried egg, some tattered vegetable leaves, and some wide noodles broken into 1 or 2 centimeters. These are all things that the supermarket had to throw away every day, and now they were feeding many poor families. "My mom came to see me today." Catherine broke the silence while eating. "She doesn't want us to continue like this, but I can't convince her." Lynch put down his knife and fork, watching as some fresh seasoning was added to the girl's plate. Transparent, a bit bitter, and slightly salty. Catherine had actually made it very clear she couldn't convince her mother, so one of them had to be convinced by the other, and it could only be her who was convinced. The food on the plate, which wasn't very tasty to begin with, became even less so, and Lynch sighed. "When are you leaving?" Catherine was on the verge of breaking down. "Tomorrow. My mom and brother will come to pick me up. I'm sorry, I don't want this, but..." "That's enough." You don't have to apologize. I'm the one who should be sorry. Linch reached out and touched the girl's tear-streaked face. He had to pay for what this body of his had done before. For more than 2 years, the entire burden of life for the two young people had been placed on this 20-year-old girl. Linch was undoubtedly a scumbag, a very scummy one. This kind of life gradually wore away all the girl's fantasies about romance and the future. She experienced these things and began to bow to reality and fate, even though there might still be a glimmer of fantasy preserved in the deepest part of her heart. For example, Linch would not ask the girl to stay. Whether it was because she was the first to say she was leaving, or because of the uncertain but definitely full of unease and danger life ahead, it was not suitable for this girl. Although it was a bit cruel to say so, the facts were the facts. After an unforgettable night, Catherine left with her things early the next morning, but she also left something for Linch. A passbook and the key to the apartment. He had to thank the bank for not caring much who deposited or withdrew money from the passbook, which might also be a testament to Catherine's farewell to her past life. After teeing himself up, Linch withdrew all the money from the passbook in the morning, $440-9.30-5 Then he found the landlord, and after talking with him for about half an hour, he returned the apartment with half a month's rent left for $100. It was originally $70-5, but Linch didn't want any of his things. The landlord felt that this was not a bad deal, and finally agreed, giving him an extra $20-5. The change was kept for the first few days of living expenses, and the rest would be rolled into his plan. He was already a little impatient. He was eager to teach this naive world a lesson. "Sir, would you like a newspaper?" A young boy wearing a dirty baseball cap and carrying a huge leather satchel appeared in front of Linch. The boy looked to be about 11 or 12 years old. He looked at Linch with some expectation and opened his satchel to reveal the newspapers inside. These children were all managed by various news headmen. This news headman was not a newspaper headline, but referred to the managers of the newsboys. They controlled the mobile newspaper sales market in certain areas through some relationships, means, or other methods, and only their own newsboys could sell newspapers here. Others could not enter, and newsstands were not included. Every morning they would gather outside the newspaper office, load the still warm newspapers onto carts, pull them back to their base, and then distribute them to these young children and send them out onto the streets. Each child had a sales quota, a minimum limit, and if they fell below this limit, they would be beaten or starved, and only after exceeding the standard could they enjoy food, but there were no rewards. The orphanages and some poor families had already taken their work remuneration, and all they had to do was work as much as possible in exchange for a place to shelter from the wind and rain, and 2 meals to sustain their lives. Some people might think this is hell, but compared to those living in an even more desperate abyss, these children are like being in heaven. Linch took out a $1 bill from his pocket and chose to newspapers. Local newspapers were 50 cents each, and national newspapers were $1 each. The newsboy kept thanking Linch for his patronage, and even remembered to take off his hat and bow. For Linch, $1 for 2 newspapers might just be an unavoidable part of life, but it was also the salvation this child most wanted every day. The child was about to leave, but was called back by Linch. "Sir, is there anything else I can do for you?" the young boy asked. Children like him were often more adapted to this society than those with good family conditions who were still in school. Looking at the small face that was still tender, but already showing some smiles ripened by reality, Linch felt a little emotional. This was the worst of times, but also the best of times. He asked, "Want to make money?" The child immediately nodded. "I dream of it, sir, but I don't do anything illegal. Where there is light, there will be darkness. The more the darkness sets off the light, the brighter the light will be, and conversely, the light will make the darkness even darker. Some people use children to sell newspapers, but some people use children to commit crimes. These are not top-secret rumors. In the process of this society's vigorous development, everyone is dazzled by wealth. As long as they can make money, someone will do it, no matter what kind of work it is." Linch shook his head. "Do you have 90-7 cents? The newsboy hesitated, but quickly took out 90-7 cents from his pocket. He had some change in his pocket, all arranged by the news headman and placed in everyone's backpack when they went out. This money didn't belong to them. The news headman would count it when they returned. And if anyone lost money or was short of money, at best they would go hungry. At worst they would be beaten, which made the children very sensitive to money. Looking at the 90-7 cents all coins that the child took out, Linch took out another $1 bill, placed it in the child's left hand, and took the 90-7 cents from his other hand. "Sir, I'm still 3 cents short. I'll give it to you now." The newsboy thought Linch wanted to change money. City transportation usually had the types of tickets, 10 cents and 20-5 cents, one for within 5 kilometers and one for outside 5 kilometers. Neither buses nor subways gave change. If you gave them 50 cents, they would only give you 2 tickets, not 1 and change. This also made many people more or less prepare some change on them to avoid losses. Linch stopped the newsboy's action and repeated the question, "Want to make money?" The newsboy hadn't reacted yet, but taking advantage so openly for the first time made him a little uneasy. He hesitated before nodding. "I do, sir, I dream of it." The smile gradually appearing on Lynch's face made the child feel as if he had seen the newly risen sun. Not dazzling, the light was gentle, but it could tear apart the darkness and illuminate the entire sky. He asked again. After a brief moment of surprise, shock, and bewilderment, the newsboy quickly took out 90 - 7 cents from his bag and held it in his palm. His face was flushed. It was clear that he was now excited, nervous, apprehensive, and a little suspicious, his clear eyes looking at Linch, watching what this guy was about to do. Linch took out another $1 bill, placed it in the newsboy's hand, and took the 90 - 7 cents from his other hand. He asked with a half-minus smile, "Do you want to make money?" At this point, the newsboy was trembling with excitement. He nodded repeatedly and found all the change he could to make 90 - 7 cents. "It's all here, sir." Linch counted out $12 and placed it in his hand and put all the change in his pocket. "It seems this is all you have." The newsboy was a little excited. Although he only exchanged $14 in change from Linch, his own income was already 40 - 2 cents, almost half of a dollar. You should know that no matter how well he did his current job, he wouldn't get a single cent. The newsheadman would give all the remuneration to the orphanage. This newsboy was a child who grew up in an orphanage, and according to the orphanage, they should do something for the orphanage after all. The orphanage had raised them for so long and asked for nothing in return. Generally speaking, once a child is over 10 years old and has not been adopted, the chances of being adopted later are very small, except for some girls who are adopted for other reasons and purposes. However, the orphanage would not interfere much. When the children are over 14 years old, they can refuse to be adopted, and at the same time, after they are over 16 years old, they have to leave here and enter society to survive on their own. In other words, boys over 10 years old are basically considered marginal people in the orphanage, and it is difficult to earn adoption subsidies and adoption donations from these children, so they must go to work. They have to use their work to compensate for the years of raising them by the orphanage. As for whether this is right or not, it is not important because no one will care about these things. Everyone's eyes will only be on things related to their own vital interests. How to integrate into society as soon as possible after being kicked out of the orphanage and find a place to live is the most headache-inducing thing for these children at the moment. If they could get some money before leaving, not too much, just enough to get by for a short period of time, they would have a chance to survive. Lynch's act of exchanging change made this child discover a bright path. Just as he had asked before, "Do you want to make money?" and his own answer, "I dream of it." After putting the money away, the newsboy asked hesitantly, "Sir, will you still be here tomorrow?" Linch nodded. "I'll be here before lunch. If I'm not here, I'll be here the next day." He tapped his wrist with his finger. "You still have plenty of time." These children who had already started to come into contact with society immediately understood Lynch's meaning, and about 10 minutes later, a group of newsboys gathered around, and more were constantly arriving. Today's money. Mr. Fox watched as Linch used a great deal of effort, running back and forth twice to transport the money bags, and fell silent for a moment. To be honest, his men had been watching Linch, so much so that he already knew how Linch had obtained this change, and he was curious and shocked by Lynch's mind. What kind of person could think of such a method to quickly obtain these coins, and without causing any obvious impact on society? He could have done it according to Lynch's method at this time, which would have saved him 10% in handling fees, but he didn't plan to do so. Suddenly he realized that what was truly valuable was not the 10% handling fee, but Lynch's mind. This mind that was always surprising was his greatest asset. "Do you want to count it?" Linch straightened up and stretched. Letting out a sigh of relief, he sat down in a chair without any regard for his image, took out a pack of cigarettes and lit one, taking a leisurely drag. "I can wait." Mr. Fox shook his head and had his men take the coins away. This money would be sent to the Federal Revenue Service later for counting and registration. Then taxes would be paid, and then it would be deposited in the bank. For some time now, people like Mr. Fox had no good methods or ways to solve these problems. To put it not so politely, most of the people engaged in this line of work were not social elites. They didn't have high education, they were completely unfamiliar with many professional fields, and some even didn't know many words. Their business didn't need these things, as long as they weren't afraid of death and weren't afraid of trouble. That was enough, which also led to many problems. In recent years, the Baylor Federation Bureau of Investigation and the Federal Revenue Service had been watching these people. In addition to catching them for certain behaviors, they were also watching the money in their pockets. They didn't have many legitimate businesses, which also made them face many troubles. Having money, but not being able to spend it became a silent pain. To this end, The Baylor Federation has also introduced a series of laws and regulations to restrict large scale cash transactions. In the regulations, cash transactions exceeding $5,000 must be reported and those exceeding $50,000 must be reviewed. Even depositing large amounts of cash in the bank requires advance notice of the source of the funds and the possible purpose of use, and a sufficient and complete tax payment certificate must be provided to prove that there is no problem with the money. The comprehensive blockade, coupled with the strict defense of the staff of the Federal Revenue Service, who were given titles such as investigator, agent, and even special agent, made everyone's life very difficult. The vault was clearly full of banknotes, but they couldn't be taken out, and even going out to enjoy themselves once could lead to targeted investigations and reviews. Such a life was really difficult. But now, from Linch, Mr. Fox saw something special, not just a simple coin transaction, but more something he had always longed for. He came back to his senses in a daze, looked at Linch, and shrugged. "I should pay you." Rounding down, $560. Linch generously waved off a few dollars in change, which was also to increase mutual trust. Mr. Fox smiled and opened a drawer which was filled with many banknotes, including $50 and $100 denominations. As his hand reached for the $1-$100 bills, Linch coughed lightly. "I think $5 and $10 bills would be better, don't you think?" Mr. Fox nodded without changing his expression and counted out $560 for him. $100 bills are rarely used in daily life. They are mostly used in business settlements and some reported large scale cash transactions. This is a society without the internet and electronic office, and the banking system actually has many loopholes that can drive people crazy. In order to avoid some problems they have already discovered, large scale transactions between enterprises still use cash transactions instead of telephone transfers, especially for inter-bank transfers, which always have some problems. If someone used a $100 bill to shop outside, this guy would definitely be targeted by some departments immediately. Don't underestimate people's sense of justice. Many shop owners, in the process of conducting some official business, such as filing taxes, will receive some brochures or have someone verbally describe some content to them. For example, when someone pays with a $100 bill, what they should do and what benefits they will get if they do so, and what disadvantages they will have if they don't. This also makes it difficult for $100 bills to be spent in the middle and lower classes of society. If a person has more $100 bills on them, the judge will consider approving a search warrant even if the evidence may not be sufficient. This is also the most painful thing for people like Mr. Fox. The money is in the drawer somewhere else. They can't spend it, and even if they give it to others, they may not want it. The reason why he pretended to go for the $100 bills was actually to test Linch. If Linch didn't say anything, their business would be limited to coin transactions. A person who doesn't know the priorities, doesn't know the stakes, and doesn't have enough caution and vigilance doesn't deserve deeper contact. Fortunately, Linch passed this test smoothly. Mr. Fox rested his hands on the arms of the chair, his head slightly tilted as he looked at Linch. "This speed is too slow. Do you have a better way?" Linch also didn't count the banknotes and stuff them into his pocket. "It will get more and more in a few days, and soon your treasures will see the light of day." Mr. Fox did not press further, just let out a sigh of relief. "I look forward to that day." The city of Sabine, where Linch was located, was a small city, ranked at the bottom of the second-tier cities in the entire Baylor Federation, with a total population of less than 800,000. But every day, this small city could sell at least 100,000 newspapers. In other words, even if they were all local newspapers, this represented $50,000 in change. And in Lynch's plan, the channels for change were not just this. There were also various retail industries and so on. Now, the main currency in circulation in the whole society is those coins, as well as those $1, $2, and $5 bills, except for the $2 and $5 bills, which are impossible to appear in the laundromat. The $1 bill is possible. After his influence began to expand, he could attract the change of the whole city, but this business could not be done for a long time. The Revenue Service would target him, and the Bureau of Investigation would also investigate whether he had to close contact with these people. He didn't want to be like Mr. Fox, forever hiding in corners and shadows. He wanted to be a tycoon, a legend. He wanted to stand in the spotlight and receive the admiration and praise of the people. That was his life. Everything he was doing now was just to have as perfect a start as possible. Wealth glitters with gold and light. It will attract all those who are lost in the fog of poverty. They may not be able to get enough wealth to make them shine too, but it can more or less change their lives. This was said by Linch, and in just a few days, all the news headmen in Sabine knew that there was a quickly turned change into whole money, and it was profitable. A large amount of change was constantly rolling in Lynch's pocket and turning into whole money. Not only were the news headmen doing it, but some newsstands and retail stores were also doing it. A 3% profit, no effort, no risk. Maybe this profit is only 3 cents in the eyes of many people. But when the principal is large enough, it will also become a considerable number: $100, $1,000. Just give the money to Lynch and then get more money back. It's that simple. According to the various laws and regulations on salary and working hours of the Baylor Federation, and the specific adjustments of regional laws and regulations, the monthly salary of an ordinary worker in Sabine City is about to $300. If the nature of the work is more dangerous, the salary may be higher, but such jobs are relatively few, and the salary is about that much. $10 is equivalent to a worker's day's work, but here with Lynch, you don't have to pay any labor, you just have to give him the money, and then you can get this money. Some people really look down on it, but more people look up to it. A large amount of change began to gather and appeared in an orderly manner in Mr. Fox's laundromat. Just 1 week later, as Lynch pushed a handcart into the laundromat controlled by Mr. Fox, 2 guys in black woolen trench coats wearing formal suits, vests, and white shirts appeared in front of him. This also made him understand why Mr. Fox said he didn't look like someone from a federal government department, because he lacked this unmistakable attire and the arrogance on their faces that wished everyone knew their specific identity. Lynch? The man blocking the handcart called out Lynch's name casually as usual, then lifted the hem of his trench coat to reveal the wallet hanging on his pocket inside. Half of the wallet was in the upper inside pocket of the trench coat, which prevented it from falling out easily, while the other half with the ID was hanging outside. The guys from the Federal Bureau of Investigation did the same. They thought it was cool. As for why they had such a stupid idea, it was probably related to some of the more popular movies in the past 2 years. The actors doing it was indeed cool, but when ordinary people brought these things into reality, it would only make people feel stupid. I'm an investigator from the Federal Revenue Service. I need your cooperation. There was no room for discussion, and the tone was not just harsh, it was prickly. Lynch asked with a smile, "Do I need to raise my hands?" In fact, from the very beginning, he knew that he would have to deal with these people, and not just this once, but continuously in the future. He just didn't expect to be targeted so quickly. The game is like this: the golden light of wealth not only attracts ordinary people who are eager to get a little benefit from bathing in the golden light and full of desire for wealth, but also some bad guys who find fault. His words sounded like he was mocking the 2 investigators. Generally, people always associate raising hands with firearms, and it was obvious that these 2 investigators were not qualified to carry weapons. In the system of the Baylor Federal Revenue Service, investigators were also the lowest minus level employees, far inferior to the agents and special agents above them, although many people were very curious why the Revenue Service needed special agents. The guy behind Lynch grabbed his wrist with one hand and his collar with the other, pitting him against the wall to teach him a lesson, and the pedestrians on the street immediately moved away a certain distance to avoid being involved. Some people left and some stayed to watch the fun. The investigator who had spoken to Lynch earlier showed his ID again and dispersed the crowd. He pushed Lynch's handcart and with his companion took Lynch and his handcart into an alley by the side of the road. Lynch, looking a little disheveled, rubbed his cheekbone. His face had hit the wall when he was pressed against it. It hurt a little, and it would probably be a little bruised, but he didn't care much. One investigator was rummaging through his handcart, opening the boxes on the handcart, taking out some old clothes and throwing them on the ground as if searching for something. The other one asked, "You've been getting close to Fox recently. Are you working for him?" He also took out a small notebook and a pen, seemingly ready to write something down at any time. The Federal Revenue Service had actually been watching people like Mr. Fox for a long time, but this watching didn't mean they had to bring people like Mr. Fox to justice. Where there is light, there will always be dark. Mystic of darkness, it is a characteristic of light. If there was no Lynch, perhaps this strange, but very socially needed balance could have been maintained for a while, until the new local revenue service director took office, or the current director needed some achievements, then they would trouble Mr. Fox. But the problem is that now there is Lynch, Mr. Fox, Lynch. Their strange actions are accelerating some things to get out of control. Catching a tax-evading criminal, and the amount involved is huge, is definitely a great achievement in the federal tax system, the kind that can get you a promotion. But if they let Mr. Fox get out of the quagmire, no one would praise the current local revenue service director. They would only suspect if there was some behind the minus-scenes deal. Plus, some possible personnel changes occurred within the Sabine City Federal Revenue Service, and some people couldn't sit still. As soon as these signs appeared, the local Federal Revenue Service immediately took action. After they had clearly investigated Lynch's identity and what he had been doing recently, they roughly figured out the problem between him and Mr. Fox. In the eyes of these experienced agents, Linch was just a very lucky kid. He accidentally discovered a way to make money, and if they used Linch as a breakthrough, it was very likely that they could directly take down Mr. Fox's group. But the first thing they had to do was to figure out what Mr. Fox and Linch were doing, whether it was the same as they thought. So this attack happened. Facing the fierce investigator, Linch always maintained a smile. A smile can shorten the distance between people and also let people relax their guard. "Did I know your name?" The investigator facing him sneered, suddenly stepped forward and punched Linch in the stomach, instantly making his stomach churn, and he had an urge to vomit. "You don't need to know my name, you just have to answer the question, understand?" The investigator grabbed Lynch's hair, making him bend over and look up at him. "I'm asking you again, what are your deals with Fox? And how does his money get into the bank?" Lynch's facial muscles twitched, and he slowly straightened up, a smile repairing on his face. He made his right hand into the shape of a gun, pressed it against his chin, and looked at the investigator. "Do you have a gun? Let me taste a bullet." His words made the investigator not react for a short time, followed by shame and anger. But when he met Lynch's gaze, it was as if a basin of ice water was poured over his head, and he completely lost his temper. The bright and clear eyes carried a kind of expectation, coupled with the content of his tone and a hint of heart-minus trembling madness, which made the investigator's heart suddenly contract. He could clearly feel that this person was crazy. He subconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva and looked away, but then turned back again, staring at Lynch, pushed him away, and shouted, seemingly fiercely, "Answer the question." He was actually already a little timid, but he used this way to cover up his timidity and at the same time maintain a distance from Lynch. He didn't want his true inner self to be exposed to a big kid who had just left school for a few years. Lynch acted as if nothing had happened, his head slightly raised, facing the narrow sky above the alley, showing his most brilliant smile. "Can I know your name, sir?" "There's nothing here." The other investigator didn't know what was happening here. He threw out all the old clothes from the two boxes, including the wooden boxes used to hold them, which were also broken into several pieces. There were no coins or change here, let alone the hundreds or thousands of change in the report. There wasn't even a single coin. The investigator in the subtle standoff heard this, and his first reaction was that it was impossible. They had already investigated almost everything clearly. This kid named Lynch had been exchanging change in an unimaginable way on a large scale. Before Lynch appeared, no one would have exchanged change at such a loss. He was a pioneer, and the reason behind his almost endless exchange of change was believed by the investigators of the Sabine City Revenue Service to be for Fox's use. During this time, Lynch had only been in contact with Fox, no one else, and in the past few days, the tax declaration amount of the laundromat under Fox's name had increased significantly. The Sabine Revenue Service believed that Lynch was the key man. In fact, people had been watching him since the day before yesterday. According to his routine, he should be taking the collected coins to the laundromat now on the surface to do laundry, but in fact to conduct illegal transactions. Then he would continue to exchange change until he had collected a certain amount again next time. As long as they seized the change in his hands, marked it, and then had Lynch send the coins to the laundromat, the entire evidence chain would be complete. Once Fox started to declare his tax situation, they would immediately arrange for a specialist to come and check the information he submitted, and then catch him on the spot and send him to prison. Everything was calculated perfectly, but something went wrong here. There was nothing on the cart except a pile of old clothes, not even a single coin. Where did the money go? In the short span of a few seconds, the investigator's eyes briefly lost focus, then he turned back to look at Lynch and pointed at him, "Be careful." With that, he patted the lapel of his trench coat and quickly left with the other investigator. They had to rush to another scene. Their rich work experience made them not put all their hopes on this one group. There was another group that raided Lynch's current temporary residence. If there was no money here, then the money must be in his room. But the investigator always felt that things were not that simple. Lynch, this young man. He couldn't see through him. He didn't look like a young man who had just walked out of the ivory tower and still held reverence for this world. Lynch watched the two investigators leave the alley. He spat, bent down to pick up the clothes on the ground, and then pushed the small cart out of the alley. The sunlight shone on his face, and you couldn't tell that he had just been humiliated and punched. It was as if nothing had happened. His smile hadn't even changed. A few minutes later, he arrived at the laundromat and went directly into the storage room behind it. Then two young men greeted him and started to dismantle the handcart with tools. The handcart was not small. Its main structure was made of sturdy steel pipes with steel wires as lining. It could be seen through at a glance, so that investigator did not carefully check the handcart. The laundromat manager next to him handed him a cigarette, lit it for Lynch, and apologized. "I'm very sorry, I already know what happened just now, but we didn't help you." Lynch's gaze passed over the manager's shoulder. He watched the two workers lift the dismantled handcart steel pipes with effort and tilt them towards a basket. With the clattering sound of metal collisions, coins of various colors poured out from the steel pipes like tap water. Linch withdrew his gaze and landed it on the manager. He shrugged nonchalantly. "It's okay. I always have to deal with them. That's why I refused. I don't like trouble." Mr. Fox had expressed his intention to recruit Linch more than once during this period. He was willing to offer Linch an ultra-minus high salary of $3,000 a month. In this society where the average monthly income is only $200 to $300, a salary 10 times the average is enough to move many people, but Linch was not. He knew that people like Fox who walked on the Great Rack would have a hard time getting rid of some people's surveillance for their entire lives. Once he agreed, he would also become one of them, and no matter what he did in the future, someone would be watching him. If he didn't join, it would be another matter. His youth, his shallowness, would not make people pay too much attention to him. By the time people started to notice him, he would have almost completed his initial primitive accumulation. Besides, he looked down on a guy who lent money to the poor to get by in a small city. The manager smiled and said nothing. Linch, on the other hand, asked another question. "Who was that guy who hit me?" He lowered his head, smoking, his gaze downwards, his hair and smoke obscuring his eyes. The manager couldn't see through Lynch's eyes to observe his true emotions at this time. "Michael, the head of the investigation team of the Sabine City Federal Revenue Service. He's a troublesome person. You better not think about those inappropriate ideas." The manager gave a friendly reminder. The Federal Revenue Service itself is a system. They not only have investigators, agents, special agents, but even their own militarized units. It sounds ridiculous and absurd, but this is the truth. A regular, complete, and most professionally trained military unit used to deal with some special cases of armed tax resistance. So most people will tell the rookies who just entered the industry, "You can do most of the things you want to do, but before the 7th of every month, you must go to the local tax bureau to file taxes. Otherwise," Michael, as the head of the investigation team of the Sabine City Federal Revenue Service, his status and position are not the highest, but he is considered middle management. Even Fox would not want to offend such a person without a reason. For these tax inspectors, everyone has flaws. Because a person cannot accurately remember every income and the proportion of tax types, as long as a decimal point or a cert and digit after the decimal point is wrong, they can send you to prison. Linch nodded and took a deep drag on the cigarette, but with both hands. "I know. I'll take the initiative to get out of his way next time I see him." The manager patted Lynch's shoulder and didn't continue on this topic. "How much is it this time?" Not counting the change, $4,500. The manager was slightly stunned after hearing this and then smiled. He took out several rolls of banknotes tied with rubber bands from his pocket. They were all $5 and $10 denominations, and these banknotes were also very old, so they could be easily spent. For the whole society, these $5 and $10 banknotes are like the coins in the laundromat. No one can say for sure what each coin has gone through to appear here. The Revenue Service can only make this money clean according to the amount of tax declared by the laundromat and have it deposited in the bank under their witness. Linch rolled up the money and put it back in the handcart. He waited for a while, and after his dirty clothes were washed, he took them all with him and left with the handcart. Meanwhile, on the other side, a group of people had just raided Lynch's temporary residence. Not only did they not find a single copper coin, but they also didn't find anything of value. Damn it. They failed to obtain any solid evidence, and they also alerted Linch and Fox, which would bring them more trouble, and the investigation might even be terminated because of this. With a loud bang, a chair fell apart in Michael's hands. His partner hurriedly stepped between him and the informant, trying to calm Michael down as much as possible. Today's operation was a complete failure, whether it was the surprise ride on Linch who was going to deliver the goods or the search of his temporary residence by another team. They didn't find anything unusual at all. They didn't even see a single dollar of change, let alone the at least $5,000 of change mentioned by the informant, neither on Linch himself nor in that room. The failure of the operation meant that Michael would lose face in front of his colleagues. The hierarchy and job relationships within the Federal Revenue Service created an unimaginable level of competition in this special department. Everyone wanted to become a special agent, not an investigator, and Michael was one of those with a very good chance of promotion. But if the follow minus a plan failed because of this failed operation that alerted Linch and Fox, then he would become a laughing stock, and he shouldn't expect a promotion in the next 2 or 3 years. Most people, when faced with problems and troubles, will shift the blame to others, and Michael attributed this failure to the informant giving unreliable information. So he arranged to meet the informant in this room, and then in a rage and roar, he picked up a chair and slammed it on his back. "Do you know how much I lost because of your wrong information?" He struggled to break free from his partner's restraint while pointing at the informant who was lying on the table and looked very painful. The informant was a news headman. The main intelligence channels in Sabine City and other cities were controlled by some professional intelligence gathering agencies and news headmen. The newsboys would report any unusual things they discovered to the news headman, which was another job between the news headman and the newsboys. They might not give the newsboys any reward for this, no money, no rewards, but the newsboys still did it obediently in exchange for a meager favor. Some smart investigators and agents had similar informants, and at the same time, a news headman did not only serve one superior. Everyone came out to buy and sell intelligence, not for any sense of justice or morality, but for money. There was no need to portray oneself as too noble. There were people like Michael, but not many. Venting their anger on the informant was a very stupid move. The news headman's facial muscles twisted and contorted from the heavy blow of the chair on his back. His eyes gleamed with hatred, but this hatred soon became submissive. He had something on him in Michael's hands. He had been with a young girl before, and something happened later which was coincidentally discovered by Michael. Michael took the girl away, and at the same time left some evidence, such as a recording of his confession and the crime process he wrote down by hand with his fingerprints. I didn't lie. The kids I have gave him nearly $1,500 in change. I swear, I didn't lie. He defended himself, while also praying that this terrible thing would pass quickly. He seemed to have forgotten that there was once a girl who prayed like this but did not get the result she hoped for. Michael pushed his partner away, walked to the table, grabbed the news headman's hair and punched him. His partner stood by and did not continue to stop him. As long as Michael didn't use anything, he wouldn't interfere too much. At least he wouldn't kill someone with his bare hands. But he could with something. He was just trying to prevent accidents, not wanting Michael to be violent. Of course, if someone really died, it wasn't impossible to solve. It would just be a little more troublesome, and a lot of things would have to be taken care of. Sabine City is a small city, whether it's the Bureau of Investigation or the Revenue Service. They are very familiar with the people in the court. They won't sentence a government official with a bright future to death for someone who is on the gray edge. There is a high probability that he will be acquitted in court. After all, it is acceptable for some small accidents to happen during the pursuit of a fugitive. 1 punch, 2 punches, 3 punches. After several consecutive punches until the news headman's cheeks were swollen and even a little deformed, Michael finally put down his fist. He shook his hands, picked up the glass of water on the table and held it up, pouring the cold water on the news headman's head. The water trickled down his hair, instantly waking up his somewhat fuzzy consciousness, followed by a sharp pain and a numb feeling of local loss of consciousness that made him a little at a loss. It hurt, but he didn't know where it hurt specifically. Arrange for your people to send him $5,000 in change this afternoon, and then we'll catch him on the spot. Michael quickly came up with a plan. He looked back at his partner, who nodded slightly to indicate his agreement with his plan. From a legal point of view, such an act that may involve entrapment is illegal in itself, and all the actions and evidence collected from the suspect during this process are not legally valid. But this is a small city after all. Everyone knows each other, and there is no need to make each other look bad over things that won't get out. Sometimes for front-line investigators, it is normal to manipulate the evidence chain a little to get the criminal convicted smoothly, and everyone has long been used to it. He tugged at the news headman's hair again, pulling it back so that he had to lift his swollen half-minus face to look at him. Understand? The news headman's evasive gaze made the anger and some indescribable emotions in Michael's heart dissipate a lot. He was still the Michael that people couldn't refuse, not the guy who suddenly became timid and backed down. Yes, I understand. Michael let go. The wet hair made some water stains fall on his palm. He wiped his hand back and forth on the news headman's clothes, then patted the swollen face and left with a satisfied smile amidst the news headman's screams. The room returned to calm, and the news headman's eyes gradually became submissive from a very short period of hatred, resentment, and madness. He slowly stood up, and as soon as he straightened his back, a sharp pain made him have to bend his upper body. He picked up his hat and put it on, paused for a minute or two, and left the room. On the other side, Linch, who had returned to his temporary residence from the laundromat, chose to call the police immediately upon seeing the messy room. Yes, call the police. He didn't silently pretend that nothing had happened, although he knew what had happened here. The police arrived soon. They looked at the scene and immediately made a judgment. Plus, Linch said he had lost $500. This was clearly a case of burglary, and the amount was not small. As for how to solve it, it would depend on Lynch's luck. According to the police officer, no one knew who came in, and there were no witnesses nearby. If the other party did not continue to commit crimes and be caught, it would be difficult to recover the loss for Lynch. That basically means that this case is over. Just as the police were about to leave, Linch suddenly added some clues, officer. The policeman in charge of taking notes at the door shifted his attention from his colleague to Linch. Yes? I remember now. I also lost a gold ring. It was a gift I was going to give to my girlfriend. It was engraved with my beloved Catherine. He sighed with regret. I should have carried it with me. The policeman sympathized with the young man even more. He wrote this small detail at the bottom of the field notes and comforted him. This is a very important clue. If that guy tries to sell it recently, maybe we'll find him. Is there anything else to add? Linch shook his head. No, that's all. Thank you for coming, sir. The policeman put away his pen, holding the clipboard. He adjusted his cap. Wait for our good news, young man. After briefly tidying up the room, Linch had visitors. His house was an old four-story building facing the street. The first and second floors were a small bar, and the third and fourth floors were ordinary residents. Many hotels or pubs will have short term rental rooms on the second floor for 3 to 5 days or a week, and they also accept temporary 1-day rentals at the shortest, more like a hotel or inn. This model was first discovered from drunkards. The pub owner would give them a bed and charge an extra fee, and soon most pubs started to do this. No one would complain about taking money from drunkards. Alcohol is a very special thing. It can make some people be thrown into a high-end room to sleep for a night and pay some extra money without being aware of it. And it can also make some people become simple and direct. So every bar and pub needs some rooms. This also meant that Lynch's current residence would not be in a remote, uninhabited suburb. People came and went here, and there would be many pedestrians passing by both day and night. The police said they didn't find any witnesses. It might be an experienced criminal, but in fact, it's impossible that there were no witnesses, whether residents on the second floor or the bartender behind the bar on the first floor or the few sparse customers. It's impossible that they didn't know anything. But they wouldn't say. First of all, Linch had no direct interest relationship with them. And second, there was no need to be targeted by the Federal Revenue Service for an unknown and irrelevant person, so everyone chose to remain silent. But this also happened to make the police misunderstand something and subsequently gave them room to maneuver. He had just finished tidying up the messy room when someone came to his door. It was a few newsboys. Their leather bags slung over their shoulders were bulging. They all looked very strained. Their faces flushed, partly because of the heavy leather bags, partly because of excitement. The news headman promised them that as long as they delivered this money and remembered some details of the room, they would receive an extra bonus this month, no less than $50 each. This money was very important to children of their age. In 2 or 3 years, they would have to start living independently, and they had to save some money before then to face society. Opportunities were not easy to come by, even if it was only $50. Before closing the door, Linch glanced outside. The small pub he was in was right by the main road. Outside the door was a corridor, and outside the corridor's railing was the road. From his position, he could see most of the things outside at a glance. There was nothing unusual, but his mind was already active, with his years of experience in confronting. These kids were very suspicious. It was true that these newsboys had been trading with him these past few days, but the news headman would also come, but they didn't enter the room. They basically just stood on the corridor outside. They gave a large amount of change to these children, so naturally they had to keep an eye on them to prevent them from running away while protecting their own property. They could also intimidate these children, but today there was no news headman outside the corridor. What does this mean? Any abnormal phenomena means there is a deeper problem. There are 2 possibilities for the news headman's absence. The first is that he doesn't want to have any direct relationship with this place with him. The second is that he knows this place is dangerous. So even though he cares a lot about that change, he didn't show up, but he has a way to ensure that his money won't be a problem. This is a conclusion that can be drawn without thinking. Otherwise, he wouldn't let these newsboys bring a large amount of change to exchange for whole money. Plus the things Linch had encountered before, he probably already knew what was going to happen next. Not only was he not afraid, but he felt a hint of excitement, a hint of eagerness to try. How much money is here? He brought a small wooden box from the side, placed it on the cart, and had the newsboys pour the money in. Several children poured while saying a total of $5,000, sir. $5,000? Linch chuckled, his eyes glanced at the newsboys' leather bags. That's a surprising number. I thought it would be less. This amount of money was too much, enough to directly convict him, which further confirmed his thoughts. Someone was setting him up and he was in the middle of it. If the Revenue Service or the Bureau of Investigation people rushed in later, and he couldn't explain the origin of this money and why it was in his room, he might face serious charges. At that time, as long as the other party proposed a deal, he would definitely not be able to escape their hands and could only do as they requested unless he wanted to serve a life sentence. He nodded non-committal lie, and after the wooden box was filled with $5,000 worth of coins, he pushed the cart into the inner room and said, "Hello, I'm going to the bathroom. You guys wait for me for a bit." $5,000 in coins is very heavy. A 5- cent coin is the lightest, and 3.7 grams, and a 50- cent coin is the heaviest, at 6.1 grams, plus the 10- cent and 20- 5- cent coins. The average weight of each coin is over 4 grams. $5,000, 130 pounds. Each newsboy's bag was filled with more than 20 pounds of coins. No wonder their faces were redder than usual. Just going up to the second floor made them feel obviously strained. After entering the inner room, Linch didn't rush out. He dragged the box full of money into the washroom and found a pair of sturdy fabric pants from the freshly washed clothes in the cart. He tied the two pant legs tightly and grabbed large handfuls of coins and stuffed them into the pant legs, and when the box was lighter, he directly held it and poured it in. The two pant legs were filled with coins. He tied his belt around his waist, pushed the two pant legs apart to form a stick minus-like shape, and stuffed it down the drain of the simple toilet in the washroom. This kind of old building, when it was built, didn't have all kinds of humanized U-bend designs, let alone a U-bend. Even a parallel pipe would cause the feces from upstairs to back up directly, so its drainage design was a straight main pipe, and then each floor had a downward sloping pipe directly connected to the main pipe, and there was a 1-way flap where the main pipe connected to the septic tank. The advantage of this design is that there will be no backflow, and the residents on the lower floors don't have to live in fear of the toilets spewing feces. The disadvantage is that sometimes the house will have a strange smell. If an exhaust fan is installed, you don't have to worry about these things. He hung a soap box, a simple wooden box, on the belt buckle. This box could ensure that the belt buckle would float on the sewage, so that when he took it out at night, he wouldn't have to jump into the septic tank to find it little by little. After a faint sound of sinking and the sound of the wooden board bouncing back and hitting the pipe, he breathed a sigh of relief. Not long after, Linch returned to the room with a few stacks of banknotes. The newsboys were already getting impatient. Their attention was completely focused on Lynch's hands on that thick stack of banknotes. He sat on the edge of the bed, casually picked up a few newspapers, unfolded the banknotes that were rolled up with rubber bands, and handed them to different children respectively. "You guys count it once first, and I'll count it once again." This was his rule, and people were willing to do it this way. This way of both parties counting established an important channel of trust for Linch and these traders. The children didn't count quickly, and when the first child finished counting a stack of $10 bills in his hand, he said the number he had counted and handed the money to Linch. Linch counted it again in front of him, then directly put it in the newspaper, wrapped it in the newspaper, then took out a rubber band from his pocket, tied the newspaper, and gave it to the child, which was what he had been doing all along. According to his initial statement, the most inconspicuous thing in the newsboys, leather bags was something related to newspapers which could prevent them from being targeted by some people. This statement was also recognized by the newsboys, and since then, as long as the amount of money exceeded $50, Linch would wrap it in newspaper and give it to them, and it has become a habit they are accustomed to now. After counting one stack of money after another, and then wrapping them in newspaper and tying them with rubber bands, Linch sent the children away and immediately returned to the inner room, taking out large handfuls of banknotes from several pockets on his body. He played a little trick and kept a lot of the banknotes that should have been given to those children. This is actually a very simple little trick when counting money. Use your ring finger to lift a part of the banknotes around your middle finger, and then at the moment you finish counting, your middle finger retracts and you hold it down with your palm facing down, and that part of the money will be held in your palm. At this time, the child who has finished counting money is focused on the stack of money that Linch has placed on the newspaper, which allows Linch to easily put the hand holding a part of the money back into his pocket. He needs to get a rubber band. Then the money that has been counted by both the newsboy and Linch will be wrapped in newspaper and tied with a rubber band under their watch. The whole process from Lynch's action to the money leaving people's sight is probably less than 2 seconds. In addition, these children are relatively young and Linch is older, so they don't dare to offend Lynch's authority and won't suggest recounting. So Linch successfully got the money back. If they had the courage to resist, they wouldn't be just newsboys now. About $2,000 or $3,000 he didn't count. Since the other party was trying to frame him with this method, then he couldn't be blamed for getting some compensation back first. Just as he finished everything and hid the money, the door to the room was suddenly kicked open. Michael walked into the room with a triumphant smile on his face. He glanced at Linch sitting on the edge of the bed, the corner of his mouth curled up, and he chuckled twice. He didn't know why he suddenly laughed. Maybe it was a kind of showing off. He didn't know. He casually lifted the hem of his trench coat, revealing the wallet tucked in his pocket with his ID on it. Federal Revenue Service. Someone reported that an illegal transaction just took place here. We need to check. This time it wasn't just Michael and his partner. There were several other people who immediately began to search the room at Michael's signal. Michael walked over to Linch and sat down next to him, looking at this young man who had made him feel a brief moment of fear. He said with a half-minus smile, "The last time I sent a kid your age to prison, he was still very arrogant and said it was just a vacation for him. He thought prison wasn't scary at all. Do you know what happened to him later?" He said some unsettling words to warn Linch. Michael stopped talking as he was speaking because he suddenly found that the young man in front of him did not show any signs of unease or fear after hearing these words. He was as calm and composed as he was at the beginning, which made Michael feel as if he had been humiliated in return. He was like a clown saying some ridiculous things, and he was being looked down upon again. His face gradually darkened, and he snorted and decided not to speak anymore when they found the evidence. They could make this guy cry. But why haven't they found anything yet? Watching his men start searching again from the door, Michael's scalp suddenly tightened. He realized something. He glanced at Linch and immediately rushed into the inner room. The house wasn't big, strictly speaking. It only had two spaces, a corridor and bedroom connected to the main door, and a dressing room with a wardrobe. There wasn't much complicated stuff in the dressing room: a completely open wardrobe, an ironing board that had been put down by his men, a small storage box with some miscellaneous tools, and a basket for washed clothes. Further in, there was a small shower space, and finally the toilet. A cart was just lying in the middle of the dressing room. "Where's the money?" he asked sternly. The kids just now had all claimed that Linch had put the money in a box and pushed it into the dressing room with a cart, but now it seemed that wasn't the case. Two of his men shook their heads, embarrassed lie. "Sorry, boss, we didn't find anything." "Where's the wooden box?" he asked with a last glimmer of hope. "Is the wooden box here?" One of them pointed to the wooden box on the ironing board. It was empty. There was nothing inside. Michael rubbed his face with both hands, pulled his hair. He paced back and forth with his hands on his hips, and then hysterically went over and slammed the wooden box on the ground. The shattered wooden box reminded him of Lynch's seemingly mocking gaze. He rushed out and grabbed Linch by the collar, lifting him up. "Where's the money? Where did you hide that $5,000? He roared, the anger in his heart making his reason begin to fade. Twice he had been fooled by this kid. Twice no one had ever dared to do this to him. Linch had a faint smile on his face. He calmly looked at Michael. "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't even have $500 on me in total. I don't know where you got this information from, but it's obviously wrong." Wrong my ass. He had personally watched the newsboys deliver this money in such a short time, less than 2 minutes. Linch hadn't even left the room. Where did he hide the money? He really wanted to punch Linch in the face to let this bastard know how terrifying he was, but he also knew that if he did, he would soon be under investigation. People might turn a blind eye to some minor details in order to better bring criminals to justice. But they would not allow framing through violence. Once this kind of thing was exposed to the media, the entire Sabine City judiciary would be disgraced. At that time, people who even Michael's superiors couldn't afford to offend would naturally come to investigate the official misconduct here, and he would become the sinner of the Sabine City judiciary. He suppressed the anger in his heart, pushed Linch onto the bed, and then personally searched the room. Everything was in a mess. Even the toilet tank was removed by them, but in the end they found nothing. The $5,000 seemed to have disappeared into thin air. No, it was as if it had never existed. Linch remained calm throughout. No fear, no anxiety. Just calmly watching Michael bustling around in this 50 square meter room until he completely stopped. By this time, Michael was also very clear that this operation had failed again. No, not just this operation, the operation against Fox would also be hindered, and his troubles were big. He pointed at Linch. "You were lucky this time you got away with it, but you'd better pray you can be so clever every time. Just once, as long as I catch you once, I promise to send you to prison, and you won't have a chance to get out in this lifetime." He clenched his fist, turned and walked towards the door. "What are you still doing here? All of you go back and write reports." After watching them leave, Linch smiled and shook his head. They hadn't searched him, on the one hand. They didn't have a search warrant and couldn't search him. On the other hand, their target wasn't the small amount of money that might be on Linch, but the $5,000 that was enough to directly convict him. Large cash transactions need to be reported to the Revenue Service, and they didn't do that, which is an illegal act. Don't say anything about making up for it later. There was no such thing as later. But even if they had searched him, it wouldn't have mattered. Instead, it would have violated the regulations. Michael often lost control, but there were some things he wouldn't easily touch. After waiting for a few minutes, Linch tittied up the room, locked the door, and left. There is a saying that goes, once is an accident, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a pattern. Michael had offended him twice already, and he couldn't keep swallowing his anger like this. Now he had about $7,000 or $8,000 in total, which was not enough for him to complete the first part of his plan. The money minus making activities had to continue, and at the same time, he also had to start considering how to get revenge. In his past life, in that small room, he had met an interesting friend who told him that predators hunt not entirely to fill their stomachs. If you don't resist, others will push their luck, and it's necessary to state your position when necessary. Not long after wandering around outside for a while, he found a relatively remote jewelry store and walked in. The bell tied to the top of the door rang, and a person wearing magnifying glasses behind the counter straightened up and smiled, "Welcome." Linch smiled and nodded in greeting and walked to the counter. "I want a simple gold ring. I plan to give it to my girlfriend. Can you help me engrave some words inside the ring?" His youthful appearance, handsome face, coupled with a slightly shy smile, easily made the somewhat elderly jewelry store owner feel favorable towards him. Of course, kid, I have to say you came to the right place, understand? 20 minutes later, Linch left the jewelry store, and at the same time, he had a gold ring in his hand with "My beloved Catherine" engraved on the inner circle. Do you have Michael's family information? After wandering around outside for a while and making sure no one was following him, Linch came to Mr. Fox's office on the basement floor. He had a hint of pity for the weak on his face. This was the greatest sorrow for people like Mr. Fox in this era. They were very rich, perhaps not as rich as those big capitalists, but definitely more than enough compared to ordinary small merchants, yet they couldn't even afford to rent a better office. They couldn't be exposed to the light. Neither their business nor their wealth would be protected by the law. Instead, they would be targeted by the law, so they could only work in the damp, moldy basement. The mold spots in the corners of the walls and some yellow decorative panels made Linch want to laugh. If he had this much money and resources, he would have taken off long ago. His business with Mr. Fox was still in its honeymoon phase, and Linch, who could provide over 10,000 in change every day, had become Mr. Fox's most watched person recently. At first, he thought Linch couldn't do it, but as time went on, Lynch's speed got faster and faster, and now he could provide change 3 to 4 times a day. The number of times might have dropped significantly compared to the more than 10 times on the first day. But the amount of change he provided was increasing, which greatly helped Mr. Fox to turn that money into money that could be deposited in the bank as soon as possible. Every day before leaving work, he would voluntarily declare his income once, and have the tax officials watch them pour out the money from each washing machine's coin box, count it, and then deposit it directly into the bank. Large amounts of money deposited in the bank required tax certification documents to prove that the money was legal before the bank would allow it to enter the system. This also meant that Mr. Fox's money was being laundered faster and faster, and it might not be a few months before he could rent a store facing the street in the most prosperous part of Sabine City and work in a magnificent environment. This also kept the relationship between the two of them good. Linch made some money, but it also saved Mr. Fox from being troubled by some problems. It was a very suitable business. Today, after Linch came here, his first sentence was to ask for Michael's family information. The other party had troubled him twice and 3 times, and even punched him. It was impossible for him to pretend that nothing had happened. He wanted revenge. Mr. Fox frowned, then quickly relaxed. You shouldn't mess with him, you know? He's a licensed person. In the end, it definitely won't be him who suffers. A licensed person is not someone with a car license, but someone who works for the federal government and has law enforcement power. These people are very troublesome. They will naturally see each other as a whole. When you deal with a certain person, you may not be dealing with just him, but the entire group. There was an interesting incident. A lawyer was ticketed by a motorcycle cop for illegal parking. The lawyer joked with his friends that not only would he not have to pay the fine, but he could also make the cop apologize, and his friends didn't believe him. Soon the lawyer sued the local police department, and after a fierce-court debate, he won the case just as he said. Not only did he not have to pay any fines, but the cop also apologized to him in court and in front of the media. But was this the end of the story? It was not. The lawyer won the case but lost his life from the day he won the case. The police departments of all 17 states of the Federation were watching him. On the highway, he was forced to stop by a full 11 highway sub- bureaus in their respective sections, and he was pressed to the scorching hot highway ground 11 times for a search and photo session. Was that all? No, he's been living in fear until now. The police would come to his door to make trouble for no reason, and the reasons were also strange. For example, someone heard a scream from his house, or someone reported that his residence was invaded. Every time, the door that he had just repaired would be smashed by a battering ram. And then a group of mobile police would rush into his house, lift him and his wife from the bed and throw them into the yard. So here, it's best not to mess with people with licenses. In case you anger the whole group, Lynch's life will be a nightmare, especially since the person he's messing with is from the Revenue Service. The Revenue Service will stare at his every transaction and will encourage people who trade with him to report him. As long as one item is verified, they can make Lynch serve a life sentence. But Lynch just smiled. I just want to send some gifts over to resolve the conflict. He shouldn't think I'm insulting him, right? Mr. Fox was a little hesitant. He couldn't tell if Linch was telling the truth or not, but in any case, he had said what he should have said. Even if he didn't tell Lynch, Lynch would get this information from other places. At that time, he would in turn have a rift with him, so it was better to just say it here. Lynch seriously recorded Michael's information and then chatted with Mr. Fox for a while. If nothing unexpected happened, at the current speed, Mr. Fox's money should all be in the bank in about 2 or 3 months. This was a good thing, and at the same time, Mr. Fox had a new problem. Lynch, my friend, I know you are a very thoughtful young man. What do you think I should do to make my business legal? With that, he smiled. I finally got rid of these troubles. I don't want to get into them easily again. Maybe you have some methods I haven't thought of? Mr. Fox's business was, to put it bluntly, lending money to people in need and charging interest. But his interest rate was much higher than the maximum interest rate limit stipulated by federal law. And in some agreements, there was also the phenomenon of illegal compound interest, which made his business a bit awkward. Even if he could get the money back, the money couldn't be deposited in the bank. If the transaction was conducted through a bank, then the other party only needed to provide the agreement and bank statements to directly convict Mr. Fox. His requested interest exceeded the provisions of federal law. Not only would he be investigated by the prosecutor and the Revenue Service, but the money he lent out could not be recovered. The law would not recognize the legal validity of the agreement, and at the same time, it would not support Mr. Fox in demanding the loan and interest through any legitimate means. This is also the problem faced by most people in this industry. They can't solve these problems. Their money will eventually turn gray, even if it is laundered. Linch didn't answer, just shrugged. In fact, he knew how to solve this problem, but he wouldn't say it now. After chatting with Mr. Fox for a while here, Linch left contentedly. He wandered around outside for a while and then came to the place where Michael lived. Michael's home was in a high-maintenance community in Sabine City, and he had a nice family. His wife was quite pretty, looked very young, and should be a full-time housewife. Her daily life revolved around her husband and children, and the rest of her time was spent watching TV and socializing with the housewife group. His son, little Michael, was a high school student. Studying at a nearby private high school, his academic performance was very average. He had several girlfriends and was interested in everything except studying. Simple, common, a very common low-level privileged family. While Linch was observing Michael's family, Michael was also called to his superior's office. The office of the Sabine City Federal Revenue Service was not in the same block as the Sabine City Hall office complex, but in another block. They seemed to want to use this way to tell the Federal Revenue Service headquarters that they were not involved with the local people. But there is another possibility that their styles are different. Compared to the somewhat shabby City Hall and other office departments, the decoration of the Federal Revenue Service can be described as luxurious. This is not surprising. Everyone knows that the Federal Revenue Service is a very wealthy institution. They can not only use marble slabs as floor tiles, but also hang amel velvet blankets on the walls to show their nobility. In the office, a wide semi-enclosed desk surrounded the director of the Sabine City Federal Revenue Service, a middle-aged man in his 50s. He had graying hair, some forehead wrinkles, and crow's feet. But overall, he was well-maintained. At least he didn't look much different from those workers in their 40s. He was wearing a well-tailored suit and a tie, and at this time his brows were tightly furrowed. Michael, who was standing on the other side of the desk, was a little unused to the atmosphere in the room at this time. "I'm very troubled, Mike." Mike was the abbreviation for Michael used by his friends, including his superiors, in life and work, which would make them seem closer, more like one of their own. Michael scratched his head, not showing his usual bad temper at work, and even had a hint of bewilderment on his face. "I don't understand, George." "No, you understand." The director, whom Michael called George, sighed. He lowered his gaze and looked at the two documents on the desk. "You understand, Mike, Fox is his lawyer collecting evidence of your abuse of power, and besides," he flipped through the report in front of him, "some people also have opinions on your recent actions. I thought you were sure before I approved your actions, but obviously I overestimated you." He looked up from the document and at Michael. "What do you think I should do?" Michael now appeared annoyed. "It's all that bastard Lynch's fault. He somehow managed to evade our 3 searches. But I can assure you, George, that kid is definitely up to something. I saw with my own eyes the newsboy deliver $5,000 to his room. They left the money there, but when I went in, I found nothing. He's a cunning kid, and he was prepared." George raised his hand to stop Michael from continuing, then pointed at him. "You're absolutely right. He's very smart, and he's also prepared. When he wasn't prepared, you couldn't even catch his tail. Now that he's prepared, you'll have an even harder time catching his tail." The meaning behind these words instantly calmed Michael down from his shame and anger. He looked at the director behind the desk with some caution. "What do you mean?" "Nothing." Director George spread his hands, clasped his fingers together, leaned back, and sank deep into his chair. "Your several failed operations have caused some very bad effects. Fox's people are planning to deal with you. You'd better calm down for a while." The sharp Michael immediately realized something, and his voice suddenly rose a lot. "You want me to be suspended?" "Suspended?" Director George chuckled. No, you misunderstood. There's a big operation in Colan City. They're short on manpower, and they've requested support from us." Director George shrugged. "You know, our relationship with them has always been good, so I can't refuse this request. You and your men immediately go to Colan City to provide them with some help. And after you come back, you can go and catch that Linch, understand?" But the situation may change during this time. We can let others go. I'll stay. If we miss this time, it will be difficult to catch Linch and Fox. We all know they have found a mature way to avoid our investigation. Before Michael could finish his words, the smile on Director George's face gradually faded. He looked at Michael. This is not a request. It's an order, understand? The two stared at each other for a moment, and Michael realized that he could no longer change this decision. So he said angrily, "You'll regret your decision today." Director George said without hesitation, "I'll only regret not finding something for you to do sooner." Watching Michael leave the office, Director George sighed. Michael had already been promoted to the position of head of the investigation team, and he had always wanted to be transferred to the agent or special agent group. But the problem is that he is now in a management position, the head of the investigation team. He can't start from the bottom as an agent or special agent. His starting point would be an administrative position like deputy team leader. So there is also a problem. He can't be promoted without a vacant position. He knows this. So he has always been low-ski before. Recently, some news came from somewhere that someone in the bureau was going to be promoted. So he immediately got some ideas and took the initiative to apply to investigate Fox's case. For the Federal Revenue Service, 90-9.9% of the people in this country are suspected of various tax crimes. The role of the Federal Revenue Service is not to eliminate tax crimes. That is simply an impossible thing. If a passerby casually throws $1 to a beggar, will the beggar hire an accountant to file taxes for himself? So the work of the Federal Revenue Service is mainly to check the situation of large tax associated that the main taxpayer group does not have the serious tax evasion behavior as for ordinary people. Unless it is necessary, no one will take the initiative to check them. The 6-side flying fish from the North Atlantic Ocean has affected Michael. He now wants to grab some achievements and is preparing to be promoted directly when there is a vacancy. What he did was actually not too excessive. Things more excessive than what he did have happened more than once in this federation. But those people could get enough evidence to directly nail the target every time instead of acting 3 times and failing 3 times. This will become a joke within the system. He must go and calm down. Fox is not a problem at all. He just let his lawyer collect Michael's criminal evidence as a show of attitude. For a person of this level, if the Revenue Service has been targeting him and he doesn't react at all, someone will soon overthrow his rule. When he finds out that Michael has been sent to Corleone to participate in the operation there, this matter will calm down. As for Linch, that's just a small character. Director George is very clear about this. Michael's 3 failures have made him a laughingstock. His current actions have seriously violated the rules and regulations. He is acting on impulse. It's time for him to calm down. Michael came out of the director's office with a pained expression on his face. His partner was standing at the door, and before he could ask what's wrong, he waved his hand and cursed shit. The boss told us to report to Corleone City tomorrow to assist them in their operation. Shit, he doesn't trust me to catch Linch. His partner smiled and followed behind him without saying anything. This was actually a good thing. Michael, who was angry, chose to go home directly to pack his things, which could also be considered a silent protest. After a short drive, he returned to the community where he lived. Just as he was thinking about how to tell his wife about his sudden business trip, a wave of anger mixed with a hint of his heart. He violently turned the steering wheel, and the car drove directly onto the sidewalk, almost hitting a person. Some passers-by screamed, and some ran over to check for injuries. It was too close for comfort. Michael got out of the driver's seat angrily, slammed the car door, walked up to the guy he had almost hit, grabbed him by the collar, and asked loudly, "What are you doing here?" Linch always maintained a smile, just like in every previous encounter between them, calm, steady, and with a smile on his face. "Your wife is very young and very beautiful." Seeing that Michael had already raised his fist, Linch continued to say unhurriedly, "You can hit me, but you have to bear all the consequences. You should have investigated me, a poor boy with nothing. Even this life is not worth much. We can make a bet. I believe you will experience a pain that is more unforgettable than a punch, a pain that goes deep into your heart. Do you believe me?" He looked at this man as calmly as ever. The man's fierce eyes showed hesitation, wavered and softened. He withdrew his fist and even let go of Lynch's collar. Everyone has their most precious things. No one is an exception. Finding these things can easily destroy a person. No one is an exception. That's more like it. We're civilized people. Linch took a step back and adjusted his collar. "Anything else? If not, I'm leaving. I still have a lot to do." Michael couldn't help but step forward again and roared in a low voice, "This is between us. Don't mess with my family. You're breaking the rules." "Rules?" Linch had a puzzled look on his face. "I'm not in your line of work. I haven't had any dealings with you. Are you sure the rules you're talking about apply to me?" He even smiled as he spoke. "Of course, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I can remember that without you reminding me. If you have nothing else to say, I'm leaving." He looked at Michael, and the two stared at each other for about 3 to 5 seconds. Michael moved aside, and Linch nodded slightly in acknowledgement and walked past him. Watching Lynch's retreating figure, Michael showed the ID inside his coat, then backed the car off the sidewalk and soon parked it in the parking space in front of his house. He quickly returned home, saw his wife watching the daily afternoon sitcom, and quickly walked over to hug his somewhat surprised wife. Did anything unusual happen just now? I mean, did anyone knock on the door, or did anyone break into our yard? His wife was several years younger than him, which was also the reason why so many people wanted to join the Federal Revenue Service. Every year, they had the highest salaries, the best benefits, the most favorable working environment and treatment in the government system, in various unexpected benefits. This also made every employee of the Federal Revenue Service a hot commodity in the marriage market. Regardless of whether they were male or female, they could find their desired partner. Most men would choose younger women. It was not uncommon for them to be 3 to 5 or even 10 years younger than themselves. Michael's wife was 6 years younger than him, and he had always cherished her. No one came. I've been sitting here watching TV all afternoon. If someone had come, I would have noticed. The front door opens directly into the living room, so if someone knocks or enters the yard, you can see the intruder through the bright windows on the wall. The afternoon was very quiet, so quiet that she was about to fall asleep. Michael sat on the sofa with his arm around his wife's shoulder, not knowing how to bring up the matter of his business trip, and even less how to make his wife wary of the possible reappearance of Linch. On the other side, after wandering around for a few laps and buying some electrical supplies, Linch returned to his temporary residence. He was opening the door with his key when a guy who had walked up from behind suddenly got close to him, and a sharp object was pressed against his waist. A voice with a strong bad breath came from his ear. "Where's my money?" Lynch's movements only paused for a moment before he continued to open the door. He pushed the door open and stepped inside with one leg, at the same time saying, "If you don't want anyone to call the police, you'd better come in with me. We can solve any problems through communication." In this process of less than 5 seconds, Linch had already identified the identity of the guy behind him. Thanks to his accumulation of so many years in his past life, this 20 year everything was still at its peak, gave him an indescribable sense of exhilaration. Everything was in his control. He had never felt his own power so clearly before. The person outside the door hesitated, but still followed. More than $2,000 was not a small sum for him, and he was surprised that this young man Linch was not afraid of the knife in his hand.